The metal tray hit the table with a sound that didn't belong. Sarah's hand froze halfway to her mouth, the plastic spork suspended in air. Around her, the cafeteria continued its usual rhythm. The scrape of chairs, the low murmur of controlled conversations, the rhythmic clank of trays moving through the serving line. But that sound, that specific metallic ring when Denise set down her tray across from her, was wrong. Not loud, not dramatic, just deliberate. Sarah's eyes flicked up to meet Denise's face. Her cellmate's expression was blank, carefully neutral, but there was something swimming behind those dark eyes. Something that made Sarah's throat tighten. "Eat," Denise said quietly, her voice barely audible over the cafeteria noise. Sarah lowered her spork. The food on her tray, some unidentifiable protein swimming in brown gravy, suddenly looked poisonous. She'd been in Blackwood Correctional for 8 months now. 8 months of learning to read the microexpressions, the slight shifts in posture, the coded language of a place where direct communication could get you killed. And right now, every instinct she'd developed was screaming. "What's wrong?" Sarah whispered. Denise's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She cut her eyes to the left just for a fraction of a second, then back to her tray. Sarah didn't follow the gesture. "You never looked where someone indicated." "Not immediately. That was amateur hour, the kind of mistake that flagged you as either new or stupid." Instead, she took a bite of her food, chewing mechanically while her peripheral vision worked. 3 tables over. That's what Denise had indicated. Sarah let her gaze drift naturally, scanning the room as if she were just another inmate killing time before afternoon count. Officer Reeves stood against the far wall, her arms crossed, watching the room with that dead-eyed stare all the guards seemed to develop. Nothing unusual there. But then Sarah saw what Denise had wanted her to see. Marquez. She sat alone at a table meant for 4, her shoulders hunched forward, her hands wrapped around her tray like she was trying to absorb warmth from the lukewarm food. Her face was turned down, but Sarah could see the purple-black bruising along her jaw, the swollen split in her lower lip that hadn't been there yesterday. "Jesus," Sarah breathed. "Don't." Denise's voice was sharp, cutting. "Don't react. Don't look again. And for fuck's sake, don't ask questions." But Sarah's mind was already racing. Marquez had been 3 cells down from theirs. Quiet. Kept to herself. Sarah didn't know what she was in for. You didn't ask that kind of thing, but she'd seemed harmless enough. Mid-40s, graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, the kind of woman who might have been somebody's accountant on the outside. What happened to her? "I said don't ask." Denise finally looked up, and the fear in her eyes was so raw, so visceral, that Sarah felt her stomach drop. "You need to understand something right now. Whatever you think you know about this place, whatever you think you've learned in 8 months, you don't know shit. Not about this." The words should have sounded harsh, aggressive. Instead they sounded like a prayer. Like a desperate warning from someone who'd seen something that couldn't be unseen. Sarah forced herself to take another bite. The food was like sawdust in her mouth. Around them, the cafeteria continued its dance of controlled chaos. 200 women, all moving through their assigned spaces, all following rules that were mostly unspoken but absolutely enforced. Step out of line and the system corrected you. Sometimes officially. Sometimes not. "If you're trying to scare me," Sarah said quietly, "it's working." "Good." Denise pushed her tray away, the food barely touched. "Fear keeps you breathing in here. Remember that." The afternoon count came and went. Sarah stood at her cell door, eyes forward, hands at her sides, while Officer Chin walked past with her clipboard, marking off numbers like they were inventory in a warehouse. Which Sarah supposed was exactly what they were. When the all-clear bell rang and the doors unlocked for afternoon recreation, Sarah expected Denise to head to the yard like usual. Instead, her cellmate climbed onto her bunk and turned her face to the wall. "You coming?" Sarah asked. "No. You always go to the yard on Thursdays." "Not today." Sarah stood in the doorway, uncertainty rooting her in place. 8 months and she'd never seen Denise voluntarily skip yard time. The rec yard was currency in Blackwood. Fresh air, space to move, the illusion of freedom. You took it when it was offered because you never knew when privileges might get revoked. "Denise." "Go," her cellmate said, still facing the wall. "And stay visible. Stay where the cameras can see you. Don't go near the blind spots by the equipment shed." The equipment shed. Sarah's mind flashed to the prison layout she'd memorized in her first weeks. Northeast corner of the yard, where the fence met the building's exterior wall. There was a gap in camera coverage there, maybe 15 feet wide. She'd noticed it early on, filed it away as something that might be useful someday, though for what she couldn't have said. Why would I? Because that's where it happens. Denise rolled over and her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. That's where they take you when they want to have a conversation. When they want to make you understand that the rules you think exist. They don't. Not really. There are other rules. Older rules. And if you end up learning them, you'll wish you hadn't. Sarah's hands were shaking. She shoved them in her pockets, trying to project calm she absolutely did not feel. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that Marquez said no. Denise's voice cracked on the last word. She said no to something she should have said yes to, and now look at her. And tomorrow or the next day or the day after that, someone's going to pull you aside and give you the same choice. And you're going to say yes, Sarah. You're going to say yes because you want to survive, and survival is the only thing that matters in here. Choice about what? But Denise had already turned back to the wall, her shoulders rigid, her breathing carefully controlled. The conversation was over. Sarah walked to the yard in a daze, her mind spinning. The afternoon sun was bright, almost offensive in its cheerfulness. Women clustered in their usual groups, the lifers near the basketball court, the short-timers by the picnic tables, the religious crowd in a circle by the fence, their heads bowed in prayer or the appearance of it. She found an empty spot on a bench with clear sight lines to multiple cameras and sat down, making sure her hands were visible, her posture open. Non-threatening. Compliant. Stay visible. 30 minutes passed. 45. Sarah watched the yard flow around her, trying to see beneath the surface, trying to understand what Denise had been warning her about. Everything looked normal. Routine. But then she realized she didn't actually know what normal looked like. Not really. She'd been learning the surface rules, where to stand, how to talk, who to avoid. But there were depths here she hadn't imagined. Currents moving beneath the everyday choreography of prison life. First time alone? Sarah looked up to find a woman standing in front of her, blocking the sun. Tall, maybe 50, with iron gray hair and a face that had forgotten how to smile. Sarah didn't recognize her, which was strange. After 8 months, she knew most faces even if she didn't know names. I'm not alone, Sarah said carefully. I'm just sitting. Your cellie didn't come to yard. That's unusual for Denise. The woman sat down without invitation, close enough that Sarah could smell her. Industrial soap and something underneath, something sharp and chemical. She usually loves her yard time. Walks the perimeter exactly 12 times. Every Thursday. Like clockwork. The precision of that observation made Sarah's skin crawl. This woman had been watching Denise. Counting her laps. Noting her patterns. She wasn't feeling well, Sarah said. The woman's eyes were pale gray, like dirty ice. And you? How are you feeling? Fine. Good. That's good. The woman leaned back, stretching her arms along the back of the bench, a posture of casual ownership. You've been here 8 months now. Still getting used to things, I imagine. Still figuring out how it all works. This was it. Whatever Denise had been warning her about, it was happening now. Sarah could feel the weight of it pressing down like the air pressure before a storm. I'm managing, she said. I'm sure you are. You seem smart. Observant. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Those are good qualities in here. They can keep you safe. Or they can get you killed depending on how you use them. Sarah said nothing. In prison, silence was sometimes the only correct answer. My name's Voss, the woman continued. I run the laundry detail. We're short-handed right now. Lost a worker recently. Needed to reassign her to other duties. Marquez. She was talking about Marquez. Sarah's jaw ached from clenching it. I heard you worked accounting on the outside, Voss said. That means you're good with numbers. Good at keeping track of things, making sure everything balances. That skill set could be very useful in the right context. I'm already assigned to the library, Sarah said. Assignments can change. Voss shifted, and something in her pocket clinked softly, metal on metal. The laundry room is interesting work. Very specific. We handle all the facility linens, uniforms, everything. Sometimes items get damaged, need to be replaced. Sometimes items get lost. And then they need to be accounted for. Logged properly so the inventory stays balanced. So nobody notices discrepancies. Sarah's mouth was dry. She understood what was being offered now, or at least the shape of it. The laundry was a pipeline. Things came in, things went out. Money, drugs, contraband, whatever flowed through Blackwood's informal economy, some of it moved through the laundry. And someone needed to keep the books clean. Make sure the official records didn't match reality, but did so in a way that wouldn't trigger audits. I'm not interested, Sarah said. The words hung in the air between them. Around the yard, life continued its normal patterns. Women talking, walking, existing. The guards stood at their posts, watching everything and nothing. And Sarah had just made the same choice Marquez had made. She'd said no. Voss didn't react immediately. She sat there, still stretched out on the bench, her face calm. But something had changed in the air, something fundamental and cold. You should think about it, Voss said finally. Really think. Because jobs like yours in the library? They go to people who are useful. People who understand their place in the ecosystem. People who say yes when opportunities are presented to them. She stood, brushing off her jumpsuit. But I'm patient. Take a day or two. Consider your options. Consider what happened to Marquez when she stopped being useful. She walked away and Sarah sat frozen on the bench, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The sun was warm on her face, but she felt cold all the way through. That night, Denise wouldn't speak to her. She lay on her bunk, facing the wall, her breathing shallow and controlled. Sarah wanted to ask her what to do, wanted to share what had happened with Voss, wanted someone to tell her that there was a right answer to this impossible situation. But she knew there wasn't. Denise had already told her the truth. In Blackwood, survival was the only thing that mattered. And sometimes survival meant compromising pieces of yourself until you couldn't remember who you'd been before. Sarah lay awake most of the night, staring at the underside of Denise's bunk. The prison was never truly dark. Emergency lights cast everything in shades of gray and pale yellow. Somewhere in C Block, someone was crying, the sound thin and desolate. The ventilation system rattled and hummed. Guards walked past every hour for count checks, their flashlights sweeping across the cell. This was her life now. This narrow rectangle of concrete and steel. These rules, spoken and unspoken. These choices that weren't really choices at all. By morning, she'd made her decision. Officer Reeves found her during breakfast. Warden wants to see you. Finish up and come with me. Sarah's stomach clenched. She forced herself to swallow the bite of toast she'd been chewing, though it felt like ground glass going down. Across the table, Denise kept her eyes on her tray, but Sarah saw her hands tighten around her spork. The walk to the administrative wing felt like a death march. Their footsteps echoed on the polished linoleum, passing through 3 sets of locked doors, each requiring Reeves to scan her badge. The deeper they went, the quieter it became, until the sounds of the general population faded completely. Warden Kimball's office was surprisingly ordinary. A desk, filing cabinets, a window that looked out onto the parking lot where the free world started just a few hundred yards away. Kimball herself was a trim woman in her late 50s, her hair styled in a professional bob, her suit perfectly pressed. She could have been anyone's suburban mother. Anyone's PTA president. Sit down, Sarah, she said, gesturing to a chair. Sarah sat. Reeves took up position by the door, her hand resting casually on her belt near her radio. I understand you've been approached about a position in the laundry, Kimball said, shuffling through some papers on her desk. I wanted to touch base with you personally. Make sure you understand what a good opportunity this is. The words were pleasant, conversational even. But underneath them, Sarah heard the steel. This wasn't a conversation. It was a command dressed up in language that allowed everyone to pretend it was something else. Voss runs an excellent detail, Kimball continued. Very organized. Very efficient. The women who work for her tend to have fewer problems. They understand how things work here. They make their time productive. Sarah's hands were sweating. She wiped them on her jumpsuit. And if I prefer to stay in the library? Kimball looked up from her papers, her expression neutral. The library is being reorganized. Budget cuts, you understand. We're reducing the staffing. But I'm sure we can find you something. There's always work in the kitchens. Or sanitation. Those are important jobs too. The message was clear. Say yes to the laundry or get buried in the worst assignments the prison had to offer. Work that would break her body, eliminate any privileges, put her in constant contact with the most volatile populations. I'm not a criminal, Sarah said, the words escaping before she could stop them. I mean, I made a mistake, but I'm not, I don't. Everyone here made a mistake, Kimball interrupted gently. Everyone here is a criminal, Sarah. That's why you're at Blackwood instead of your suburban townhouse. The question isn't what you were. The question is who you're going to be in here. Are you going to be someone who makes her time harder than it needs to be? Or are you going to be smart? Sarah thought about Marquez's bruised face. Thought about Denise staring at the wall, terrified to even talk about what she knew. Thought about the camera blind spots and the old rules that superseded any official regulations. She thought about her daughter. Emily was 12 now, living with Sarah's sister while she served out her 30-month sentence for embezzlement. 30 months for stealing $60,000 to pay for her daughter's cancer treatments after her insurance denied the claims. 30 months of visiting hours and phone calls and pretending that everything would be fine when she got out. But that was only true if she survived. She made it through. If she didn't end up like Marquez or worse. "I'll do it," Sarah said. The words tasted like ash. "I'll work the laundry." Kimball smiled. "Excellent. I knew you'd make the right choice. Report to Voss tomorrow morning after breakfast. She'll train you on the specific procedures." She shuffled her papers again, a dismissal. "Oh, and Sarah? This conversation never happened. As far as the official record shows, you requested a transfer to laundry detail. You'll sign the paperwork on your way out." The paperwork was waiting with Reeves. Sarah signed it mechanically, her hand moving without conscious thought. The form said she'd requested the transfer due to personal interest in developing new skills. It would go in her file, become part of her permanent record. Evidence of her cooperation, her compliance, her corruption. That night, Denise finally spoke to her. "You said yes." It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded anyway, sitting on her bunk with her head in her hands. "I didn't know what else to do. There wasn't anything else to do." Denise's voice was flat, empty. "That's the point. That's what they do to you in here. They give you choices that aren't choices, and then they watch you break yourself trying to live with them." "How long have you been working for Voss?" 3 years. Since 6 months into my sentence." Denise laughed, a bitter sound. "I said no at first too. Ended up in the infirmary with a ruptured spleen. Fell down some stairs according to the report. When I got out, Voss came to visit me. Asked if I'd reconsidered. I signed up that day. Sarah felt sick. We could report it. Go to the oversight board, the state inspector, someone. You think they don't know?" Denise sat up and her face was haggard in the dim light. "Sarah, Kimball called you into her office. The warden herself. This isn't some rogue operation. This is how Blackwood runs. Probably has been for years. The official system and the real system exist side by side, and everyone who matters knows it. You think some inspector is going to take the word of convicted felons over staff? You think anyone cares what happens to us?" She was right. Sarah knew she was right. They were criminals. They'd lost their voices the moment they were sentenced. Everything that happened to them in here was filtered through that fact, discounted, dismissed. "So what do I do?" Sarah whispered. "You work the laundry. You keep your head down. You do what Voss tells you and you don't ask questions and you count the days until your release. And then you get out and you try to forget this place ever existed." Denise lay back down. "That's all any of us can do." The laundry was hot, loud, and chemically sharp. Industrial washers ran constantly, their cycles timed to the minute. Dryers tumbled and roared. Steam hung in the air, making it hard to breathe. Voss showed Sarah to a small desk in the corner, away from the main work floor. A computer sat there, ancient and slow, running inventory software that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1990s. "Your job is simple," Voss explained. "The official numbers and the real numbers need to match at the end of each week. You'll receive 2 sets of manifests. One shows what actually came in and went out. The other shows what the system thinks happened. Make them align. I don't care how. Be creative. Just make it clean." Sarah stared at the screen, at the columns of numbers that represented what? Drugs being smuggled in through dirty linens? Money being laundered through fake supply orders? Contraband being distributed through the facility while the records showed only bleach and detergent? "What if I make a mistake?" she asked. "You won't." Voss's hand landed on her shoulder, heavy and warm. "Because you're smart. And because you know what happens to people who make mistakes in here." For 3 weeks, Sarah did her job. She moved numbers, adjusted quantities, created discrepancies that canceled each other out in ways that wouldn't trigger automatic flags. She watched shipments come in and go out, never asking what was really in those industrial-sized detergent boxes, never questioning why certain uniforms needed to be replaced so frequently. She became complicit, became part of the machine. And every day she felt herself eroding. The person she'd been, the woman who'd stolen to save her daughter, who'd been willing to go to prison for doing what she thought was right, that person was being systematically dismantled, replaced by someone who could look the other way, who could enable evil for the sake of survival. Then Marquez died. It happened on a Tuesday. Sarah was in the laundry reconciling another week's worth of falsified records when the alarm went off. Lockdown. Everyone froze where they were while guards ran past, their radios crackling with codes Sarah had learned to decode. Medical emergency. C block. Cell 47. That was Marquez's cell. By dinner, everyone knew. Marquez had hanged herself with a bedsheet. At least, that's what the official report would say. Sarah saw the women whispering in the cafeteria, saw the way they avoided looking at the empty seat where Marquez used to sit. She saw the small smile on Voss's face. That night, Sarah lay awake in her cell, listening to Denise's breathing above her, and something inside her finally snapped. Not broke, snapped. Like a rubber band stretched to its limit. She understood now what had happened. Marquez had said no. Had probably tried to resist, to hold on to some piece of herself. And the system had crushed her for it. Not quickly, not dramatically. Just slowly, methodically, until she'd seen no way out except one. And Sarah was next. She'd said yes, but that didn't mean she was safe. It just meant she'd bought time. Eventually they'd ask for more. There was always more. More compromises, more complicity, more pieces of herself to sacrifice. Unless she changed the rules. The next morning, Sarah went to work in the laundry as usual. She sat at her desk, pulled up the inventory system, and began to work. But instead of hiding the discrepancies, she started documenting them. Carefully. Methodically. Creating a record that couldn't be explained away. She embedded the real numbers in backup files. She created audit trails that led directly back to Voss, to Kimball, to a dozen guards and staff members. She made sure the evidence was redundant, distributed across multiple systems, impossible to delete without leaving traces. It took her 3 days. 3 days of working while Voss watched, trusting that Sarah had been properly broken, properly trained. On the 4th day, Sarah didn't show up for her shift. Instead, she sat in her cell and waited for the inspection team that she'd anonymously notified through the prison's official grievance system, using the computer in the library during her yard time. She'd sent documentation to the State Corrections Board, to 3 different news agencies, to a prison reform advocacy group. She'd blown the whole system wide open. When they came for her, Kimball, Reeves, Voss, flanked by guards, Sarah was ready. She stood in her cell, hands at her sides, and watched them approach. "You stupid bitch," Voss hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes," Sarah said calmly. "I know exactly what I've done." Kimball's face was pale, her professional mask cracking. "Whatever you think you've accomplished. I've documented everything. Every false entry, every smuggled shipment, every payoff. It's already out there. Multiple copies. Multiple agencies." Sarah met her eyes steadily. "You're done. All of you. You'll be in solitary for the rest of your sentence," Reeves said. "We'll make sure of it." "Probably." Sarah shrugged. "But I'll be in solitary as the woman who took you down. And that's worth it." She saw it then in their faces, the realization that she'd accepted the consequences. That she'd chosen a different kind of survival. Not the kind that compromised away everything that made you human. The kind that said some things were worth suffering for. They took her to solitary that afternoon. The cell was smaller than her old one, darker, with a metal door instead of bars. No windows. No cellmate. Just Sarah and the silence. She sat on the concrete slab that served as a bed and thought about Marquez. About Denise. About all the women who'd been forced to make impossible choices and had chosen their own way to survive. The investigation would take months. Maybe years. Sarah would spend most of her remaining sentence in isolation. She'd lose privileges, lose yard time, lose almost everything that made prison tolerable. But she'd kept herself. That core of who she was, the woman who'd been willing to break the law for her daughter, who'd believed that some things mattered more than self-preservation. She'd found that woman again in the laundry room's heat and chemical stink, buried under 3 weeks of compromises. 6 months later, Sarah was released early, part of a settlement after Kimball, Voss, and 11 staff members were arrested. Denise was already out, having testified as part of a plea deal. They met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from Blackwood's gates. Denise looked different in civilian clothes, younger somehow, though her eyes still carried that prison weight. "You should have just kept your head down," Denise said, but she was smiling. "I tried." Sarah stirred her coffee. "It didn't take. Emily must be glad to have you back." "She is." Sarah thought about her daughter, 14 now, cancer-free and furious at a system that had imprisoned her mother for trying to save her life. "I'm teaching her something I learned in there. Sometimes survival means losing pieces of yourself. And sometimes it means refusing to." Denise nodded slowly. "You know they'll rebuild it. Not at Blackwood maybe, but somewhere else. It's not about one warden or one prison. It's about a system that doesn't care what happens to us." "I know." Sarah looked out the window toward the facility visible in the distance. But it won't be today. And maybe if enough people refuse to play along, it won't be tomorrow either. They sat in silence for a while, two women who'd learned the real rules of a place designed to break them, who'd survived each in their own way, and who'd carry those scars forever, but at least carry them as something other than victims. The coffee was terrible. The air was free. And for now that was enough.